there should be no sentimentality in your relationship with your energy provider or your insurance company or your bank. So there's already like over $2,000 pushing towards $3,000 in savings.
Welcome everyone to the third episode of the Upworth Talks, the podcast for modern empowered individuals, where we sit with inspiring characters and leaders in the field to deep dive into the world of personal finance and money management in Australia and beyond. As we venture in the world of personal finance, we explore a lot of different asset classes and investment opportunities. But what enables us to invest is to manage to save funds. Our savings are a major source of investment. Today, we will explore the tips and tricks to be better savers. I am Maxime Shori, co-founder of Upworth, and I am joined today by Joel Gibson, a former reporter and editor at the Sydney Morning Herald, who has spent the past 10 years as the face of Australia's biggest consumer network, One Big Switch, which has over 1 million members. He's a sought-after commentator in the Australian media and has written the book Easy Money, 7 Steps to Bust Bills. We are very glad to welcome you in the Upworth Talk today, Joel. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Max.
Before getting started, I should share my favorite poem, the famous financial advice disclaimer. Upworth does not provide financial advice, whether general or personal, and this podcast is solely intended for entertainment and informative purpose. Opinions expressed in this interview are strictly personal opinions and should not be relied upon to make any financial decision. Professional advice should be sought to take personal financial decisions. That said, thanks again, Joel, for joining us. Such an inspiring and interesting story that you have, as well as hopefully some stories for our auditors. But yeah, maybe we can first learn a little more about you. So before being the most wanted billbuster in Australia, you had another life as a journalist, right? Maybe tell us a little about your life before being a billbuster.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my first 10 years in the workforce, I was a full-time journalist at the Sydney Morning Herald mostly for about a 10-year period. I did a bit of freelancing before that, but I was a full-time print journalist, and I think what that taught me was how to find information, how to research a story, how to get to the bottom of something, and also how to tell a story, because at the end of the day, that's the ultimate skill for a journalist, is storytelling, and sort of taking large amounts of data or difficult to find information or whatever it is, and making it kind of palatable for people and walking them through it so that they can understand it. I almost wrote nothing at all in those 10 years about money or personal finance or consumer affairs. I wrote about Indigenous affairs. I edited opinion columns. I was the South Pacific correspondent for a year, living in Fiji. Wow. I was the back page sort of around town diarist columnist for a while. And so I did a whole range of different jobs at the newspaper, but none of them were related to money. And I was pretty hopeless with money. I was a typical, 20, 30 something who had a few $1,000s of debt on a credit card. Each year I'd get my tax return, I would pay off the debt on my credit card, and by the time the next tax return came, I'd have $3,000 of debt on my credit card again. So it was just that, what they call revolver lifestyle, that half of the people who have credit cards in Australia are living, from hand to mouth and never getting ahead. But when I left the newspaper in 2012, I initially, the first job I had was working at an organisation called One Big Switch, and they just started. They'd only launched about a year earlier. They had a very successful launch, but they were still relatively young.
So
and they were
joined the startup, basically.
Huh?
You joined the startup.
I joined
basically.
the startup, yeah, absolutely. And even today, it's One Big Switch is the biggest sort of cost of living movement in the country. There's more than 1.3 million people who joined up in the time since it launched in 2011, but it still has a startup mentality, But it was very much a startup in those days. And so it was a really interesting environment for me, coming from a big newspaper where it was a big, institution, Fairfax Media as it used to be called, before it was bought by Nine Entertainment, and going into a little startup with just sort of probably 24 people at that point that had grown very fast in its first year. So the idea behind One Big Switch was, what if we can get consumers together in very large numbers and then negotiate on their behalf with businesses. In the first instance, the first campaign they ran was on home loans. At that time, interest rates were high. So they got together about 40,000 consumers. They went to all the big banks and the second tier lenders and said, what is the best offer you're prepared to make to this group of people? Because we're bargaining as a group now. And they were successful in getting an offer from a second tier lender. The big banks all locked them out and refused to work to sort of make them an offer, work with them. But they proved the model. And then they went on to do the first big energy campaign, because in 2012, we had the carbon tax come in on the 1st of July, I think in 2012. That added 10% to power bills. And there was also an annual increase of 10% coming through at that time of year. So it was a 20% increase on power bills, which was probably the biggest that most people could remember in their lifetime. So there was a real problem there to be solved. That campaign really went bonkers. And I think over 200,000 people, maybe even over 250,000 people, joined to be part of that campaign. And so they had serious market power in their negotiations with the energy companies. And this time the big energy companies did play ball, and they unlocked an offer with one of the big three energy companies after a very fierce kind of negotiation process with multiple bidders, and they really changed the energy market in Australia, and that was the establishment of One Big Switch. And then since then, I joined, and we've done probably a dozen energy campaigns, probably half a dozen health insurance campaigns. We've done campaigns on credit cards, on mobile and NBN plans, and now here it is, probably 11 years old now, I think, One Big Switch, and it's still going strong. 12 years old, actually, this year.
Almost a teenager.
Yeah, exactly right. And I still do some work for them. It's not all I do, but I still work with them for about half the week, doing content, media, and writing money-saving content and newsletters for their members each week, and looking for ways to save. So that was my way into money saving.
But actually, so you say you didn't cover these subjects as a journalist, so it's more your personal life that encouraged you to go in this field, or like what was the driver here?
Yeah, I think I learned on the job because I had to, because I was curious about something that I didn't know enough about, and I was also at that point in my life where probably just had our first child, about to have our second, and you start to sort of think, more long term, and you get a mortgage for the first time, and you can't afford to live hand to mouth like you can in your 20s, and so it was just the timing was right. Obviously, from a professional point of view, I had to get my head around how to minimise what you spend on your household bills very fast as part of the kind of the challenge of doing the job, but also I just sort of took to it and became very, very interested in it. And I was of the view, when I looked around, I didn't see a lot of other people doing this very well. There was a lot of consumer advocacy out there, which was mostly warning people about the fine print in the terms and conditions of various offers, and in a way was frightening people so that they wouldn't act. Whereas I've always thought that what we need to do to help consumers is to encourage them to act in the right way on their own behalf, whether that's, shopping around for an energy plan or a mortgage, being prepared to switch and move for a better deal, because the biggest problem we have as consumers is inertia and fear of the unknown, and that works against us all the time, to the point where sometimes we spend, most people are probably spending hundreds or thousands of dollars every year on their household bills that they don't need to be spending because of their reluctance to move for a better deal.
Yeah, and not necessarily knowing what are the steps to take to actually achieve that.
Yeah, well, there are pitfalls, absolutely. And I don't deny that, and I think that we need to warn people about where the pitfalls are, but I think we also need to be careful not to warn them, spend so much time warning them that we frighten them into doing nothing, because the worst thing you can do is nothing. If you do nothing, then you basically will end up, over time, paying more for every single household bill, essentially being taken advantage of by some businesses who do milk loyal customers as a way of cross-subsidising the offers they make to attract new customers. So we can talk a bit about that later, but there's a couple of different phrases I use in my books that I've heard in the business world, to describe different types of customers, and there are price chasers and there are sleeping beauties. And the price chasers are the customers who always ask for or demand the best deal. And those people will, throughout life, because they're prepared to switch and move and demand and negotiate, they will pay thousands and thousands of dollars less for their household bills and have that money to spend elsewhere on the things that they want to spend money on or invest.
And this is even before actually getting together to negotiate, because then you have an even stronger power to negotiate with big players in the industry.
Exactly right. Whether you're joining a group like One Big Switch and negotiating en masse, or whether you're just in your own life, always demanding the best deal from your provider or a better deal from another provider, but not necessarily just settling for what's being dished up to you. If you can take that attitude into your day-to-day life with your household bills and your costs, it will save you thousands of dollars over time. And it's an attitude, but it becomes a habit. That's the thing. It seems hard, it seems like a lot of hassle, but once it becomes a habit, it's not hard anymore. It just comes naturally.
Yeah, and there are many different fields that we are hopefully going to explore together, but maybe do you have, to start with, a story, a specific story that you like to tell around this that shows really the power of getting into a negotiation mode and fight for it? Sure,
yeah. There's probably, there'd be hundreds over the years from my own life, but I think probably the one that best illustrates it is we at One Big Switch and in my own content, I spend most of my time talking about energy bills. Partly because energy bills in Australia over the past 10 years have been extraordinarily expensive. They've gone up very, very steeply. At one point, there was even an analysis that said that in South Australia, we had the most expensive electricity in the world at one point. So it's been a real problem, and every single home has an electricity bill, so it's across the board. It affects everybody. It affects businesses. That effect on businesses then flows through to us as customers and adds to the price of things, and we can see it happening at the moment. The big reason why we're in this cost of living crisis right now is that the cost of energy has risen right across the world. And energy is an input into every single thing that we buy. Every good, every service, there's an energy price that gets factored into that. So when the cost of energy goes up, then everything from a mobile phone to a banana to a laptop, whatever, it all goes up in price, a power bill. So I have spent a lot of time talking about energy. Now, in that time over the past 10 years or so, I've probably switched my own energy about a dozen times. And I often use that as an example to show people that there is nothing to fear, because your supply doesn't get interrupted when you switch retailers. There's really no downside. Exit fees have been all but abolished. There used to be sometimes exit fees of over $100 when you left an energy supplier. Those sorts of exit fees have, in most states, been either banned or capped. And so there's almost no disincentive for you to move on a regular basis. And I say to people, you should look to move every year, or at least every time you get a price rise, you should look to move. Often you don't have to move, because once you're prepared to walk out the door, suddenly your provider discovers an offer in the bottom drawer that they didn't tell you about before, what we call a retention offer. And sometimes they have whole teams of people who just work on these retention and win-back offers, calling customers who are leaving and making them an offer that they can't refuse. And those are often the best offers in the market. They're not on the market, they're not publicly advertised, but they're often the best offers around. And the only way you get access to them is if you're prepared to move.
Yeah. It's super important to know that, because many of us, I would say, to some extent, right, we just think, okay, we are just a small pond, right, a small fish in the pond, nobody's gonna care about our market share, obviously, which is ridiculous, but actually there is a way.
Yeah, absolutely. You are just one of, in some cases, millions of customers for these big businesses. But if at that particular point in their business cycle, their strategy is to retain customers, then they will sometimes fight tooth and nail to hold on to every single person. So it just depends, where they're at in terms of their business priorities. Sometimes they'll work really, really hard to keep you, even if you're not a particularly big account. You might have a $1,000 energy bill, not a $4,000 energy bill. But there are times when businesses will work really, really hard to keep you. And the example that I was sort of leading up to is probably about 5 years ago. I was with one energy retailer. I saw a deal that was cheaper and switched online to the cheaper deal, and then of course started getting phone calls from the current retailer. So I think I started out on an 18% discount. I switched to another plan on a 22% discount, and then I ended up in a Dutch auction, what we call a Dutch auction, between these two retailers where they were both bidding against each other, to the point where I ended up getting a 32% discount on my electricity for a year just because of this Dutch auction process where both really wanted to either win or keep me, and I almost doubled my discount as a result of that process. It didn't cost me anything. I had to take a few phone calls.
Yeah. So exactly how long more or less like did you need to like do that? Like every year you say let's do it every year. How many hours is that for someone that's decently efficient?
So I usually say to people that you should have a look at it once a year because most energy plans last for a year. And so what happens is the model of most energy retailers is get you in the door on a very cheap offer and then slowly increase your price each year. And they might even make a loss on you in the first year, but they plan to make their margin out of you in years 2 and 3 and 4. And most people stay because they don't want to have the hassle.
Because not enough people read your books.
Not enough people read my books, that's right, yeah. Most people stay. And they have the data that says that they know that some people will leave, but enough people will stay that it's a profitable model. And unfortunately what that does is it punishes loyal customers and it rewards disloyal customers. But that's the way of the world. It's not just the energy industry. The insurance industry has been built on that model. The banking industry has been built on that model. And what it means is that once a year, you should just have a look, whether you have to switch or not, and make sure your plan is still a good one. The reason that's important is because they'll almost certainly put your prices up each year. And this year, we've just seen the biggest power price increases probably ever in Australia, average of 25%. I don't think we've ever seen an average 25% power price increase up and down the east coast of Australia before. So this year, it's more important than ever to make sure that you don't just accept the price rise they gave you in July and August. They had to send you an email when they raise your prices. A lot of us just chuck it in the bin because we don't want to hear about it or we don't read the fine print. But I've seen emails that people received in July that said your prices are going up by 80%. And if you don't do anything about that, that's $1,000, $2,000 mistake. It's going to cost you an extra, unnecessary money in the coming year. So it's absolutely crucial that usually at least once a year, or even frankly every time you get a price rise, you have a look to see if there's something cheaper. I used to say do it once a year. Unfortunately, with the energy market going so crazy in the last 18 months, a lot of people have had price increases more than once a year. So if you're getting a price increase more than once a year, unfortunately, you really do need to make sure you're not getting ripped off more than once a year, every time that price goes up.
Unfortunately, I don't think energy is the only thing that's going up these days, right?
No.
We've seen the rates and everything. So maybe can you tell us, like, usually what are the main buckets that you are looking at to basically optimize your savings? Apart from energy, I think you mentioned mortgage, credit cards.
Yeah. Look, I don't think I've ever seen so many things going up so steeply all at the same time as they are at the moment. In 11 years of watching the cost of living on a daily basis in Australia, I have never seen so many bills going up so steeply all at once. And so I'm really concerned about what that means for people who really don't have... There's a lot of people out there who don't have a lot of savings, if any, and are living hand to mouth, and don't have any way of increasing their income by that amount over the coming year. Now, some of those prices might come back to earth or they might level off, but history would suggest that at best, the price rises level off and that's the new normal, as opposed to coming back to where they were.
It's quite rare to see prices going down significantly, right?
No, especially energy prices, which, there's nothing on the horizon that suggests that they're going to become radically cheaper in the near future. Interest rates probably will come down, we hope, off the peak, but who knows how much. They might settle at more like 4.5 rather than back down to where they were at 2. So that will be the new normal possibly. Grocery prices, again, might level off, but are they going to drop? I'd be very surprised, there's a first time for everything, but we'll see. But that's the problem at the moment, is that it's across the board. And the other big sleeper is insurance premiums, which is not getting a lot of reporting at the moment, but we know they're going up by an average of 15 to 20% as well. So that's the difficulty right now. I think over the last decade, I've been, working in this area, and there's always been 1 or 2 bills in the household budget that are problematic. There's been a big increase in energy bills, or we've had, a year where there were big insurance premium increases, or, it might have been... there might have been a particular year when petrol was expensive. at the moment, I just sort of came in this morning. Petrol's $2.20, $2.30. Groceries have gone up 10% in the last year and 10% the year before that. Power prices have gone up by 25%. People's mortgage costs are up about 50% compared to when the RBA started raising rates. Rents are up by double-digit figures. And then insurance, again, 15 to 20%. So how the hell people are supposed to afford all those increases?
And at the same time, those companies are having record profits, right, from what you see?
This is the latest chapter in the story, isn't it? It's very hard for people to see in the reporting season. Companies like Qantas announcing record profits when their service has been despicable for the past year and their prices have been through the roof. But even just the big supermarkets, for example, the banks announcing not record profits but very healthy profits. The supermarkets' profits were up about 5% on last year. Prices are up 10%. So that's pretty hard for people to accept. It does feel like businesses should be sharing the load a bit more instead of just passing all that burden on.
They can be helped by group negotiation. So you mentioned individual negotiation, group negotiation. Do you have other tips and tricks, strategies that you have implemented, that you have seen implemented that can really help move the needle? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think in my books, what I've done is I've used a lot of pop culture references to try and make this stuff, to give people a visual image of this stuff, and also just to make it a bit more interesting. And just because I love movies and pop culture, and it's the way I think as well. So when I was thinking, I sat down to write the first book, Kill Bills, which I then revised and expanded into the second book, Easy Money. I was trying to think of a movie or a character that kind of epitomized the attitude that you need to take into your relationships with the providers of your household bills. And there's a great movie from the mid-90s, which was one of my favorites, called Heat. And at the time, it was the only movie where Robert De Niro and Al Pacino had ever appeared in a scene together. And there's only one scene in the whole film where they're in the same shot.
Who wins the fight?
I can't tell you that. That'll ruin it. One's a cop, one's a robber.
Okay.
So one's a criminal, and the other one's a cop trying to take him down. The movie's called Heat, and it all comes down, the sort of the quote from the movie that gives the movie its name, and the whole idea behind the movie is when Robert De Niro is talking about the criminal life and sort of always being on the run. He says, you need to be prepared to walk away from anything in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat coming around the corner. And then the whole setup for the movie is he falls in love. Al Pacino, the cop, is coming after him. He has to make a decision between his love interest and walking away. And that's what kind of brings the movie to a head at the end, and there's a fantastic final scene. Anyway, that idea that you can be that ruthless, that's what you need to take into your negotiations with providers. There should be no sentimentality in your relationship with your energy provider or your insurance company or your bank. It's a purely financial relationship, and it should be based on numbers and transactional, because it is for the business. They don't care about you as a person. They care about you as a customer, but you need to be as kind of as bloodless as they are. And so I've called that attitude the De Niro, after Robert De Niro. There's a lot of characters that have that sort of attitude. But you need to basically channel Robert De Niro when you're dealing with an energy company or an insurance company or a bank, and be ruthlessly disloyal, be prepared to walk away at a moment's notice if you see a better deal. And as long as you have that attitude, as I've said, often you don't need to leave. But once they pick you for a De Niro or price chaser, they put you into a particular category. They go, okay, this person is a price chaser. They are going to leave if we don't offer them a better deal. And they will often have a deal ready there that they present to those people once they know that they have to get their best deal out to keep you.
I mean, at the end, they want to retain, and it's less costly than to acquire new customers.
It's all about numbers, right? People often talk about businesses, they anthropomorphize businesses and talk about them as if they're human, right? Businesses are good, businesses are bad, businesses are this or that. Businesses are generally none of those things. They're usually just like a machine that's been programmed in a certain way to produce a certain result. And the people running the business will say, if this happens, do this, if this happens, do that. And so you just need to understand that how the machine works, and then often you can use that to your advantage to get a better result for yourself. So one of the things I say in my books is don't get all caught up in this idea that, you know, this business is good, this business is bad. Just try and understand how they work. Businesses are about numbers. If they have to spend $1,500 to acquire a new mortgage customer, they'll give you $1,000 to stay rather than to leave because it makes sense. It's a $500 difference for them. It's cheaper to do that. And so that is generally how businesses think, for want of a better word, how they operate. And as long as you understand that, then it'll really help you in your interactions with various businesses. So the De Niro is a crucial one. You know, I also talk about other you know, strategies and what I call insider tricks, which I've learned from dealing with businesses as a, you know, negotiating and being involved in negotiations on behalf of customers, but also just in my own interactions with businesses. Another one is what I call the Liz Taylor. Okay. And we talked about
so gender equity. That's good.
we talked about that business model where businesses give you a honeymoon deal, where it's a fantastic price in the first year, and then they raise the price and they hope that you won't leave, right? And
sometimes it's even less than a year. Like I see for the rates, like for the cars, it's like a 3 month, 6 months.
Yeah.
Then they show the interest rate of the first three months, but then after 3 months, it becomes a bad deal again, right? So
it's in very fine print down the bottom somewhere. Yeah. It's really common, honeymoon deals. But if you're onto this, it's possible sometimes to take honeymoon deal after honeymoon deal after honeymoon deal, and that's why I call it the Liz Taylor, because she was married, I think, 8 or 9 times. She had a lot of honeymoons, and in certain products, now not necessarily in some credit products, if you're constantly making credit card applications, it's going to make your credit report look like a dog's breakfast, right? But when it comes to utilities like energy, telco, even with insurance, most insurance policies, you can switch as often as you like, take as many new customer deals as you like, as long as you're prepared to, but frankly, you can switch your energy in 5 minutes, so it's not a lot of effort or time. And if you're prepared to regularly move, you can win again and again and again and sort of, you know, play them at their own game, I suppose. So that's another strategy that we talk about, yeah.
Half Liz Taylor, half Robert De Niro, what's the outcome if these two had a kid? You'd basically be reading your book and maybe getting one of the best deals in the market.
They'd be the ultimate negotiator, maybe. Yeah.
So like, what's let's say the outcome, right? So for you have some, you have learned from the best apparently, and so let's say on a given year, like what does it look like in terms of savings, maybe for the main categories?
Sure. Well, let's have a look at the moment, for example. We've just seen some reports from St Vincent de Paul, the charity. They commission reports in the energy market every year to look at what the cheapest and most expensive plans are. So they've just reported that the difference between the best and worst energy plans for a typical household is $600 in some states, $1,200 in others, right?
Wow.
So in some states in Australia, that's just one bill, where being prepared to switch and being a bit ruthless can save you $1,200 potentially up to. Then look at insurance. You know, insurance. There's actually not a lot of public data in the insurance industry, but we have had a former ACCC boss, Alan Fells, back sort of 5-6 years ago when he was working in New South Wales in a job where he was sort of monitoring the insurance industry. He sometimes found, he did research where he compared quotes from different home insurers on certain properties, certain addresses, identical quotes, same address, different insurance companies, and he sometimes found a difference of over $1,000 in the quote.
So many insurances as well, right? So it adds up as well.
Yeah, you might have home and or contents insurance, you might have car or two, you might have there's probably other insurances like health, life, whatever. So look, if you look across all those insurances, let's say you've got 4 insurance policies in your family or something, well, some of them, there can be a difference of over $1,000 sometimes between the best and the worst quotes. Now that's an extreme example, but definitely hundreds of dollars. It's easy to find a difference of hundreds of dollars on most insurances between different providers. Sometimes you get what you pay for. You do need to look at the cover and see what you're getting. But sometimes the cover you're paying for is unnecessary and it's stuff you don't need. So often the cheaper insurers have just taken out aspects of the policy that most people don't want. as a way of getting the premium down. So, there are ways to save thousands of dollars on a multiple, four different insurance policies. So there's energy and insurance, and already we've saved maybe, $1,500 by shopping around potentially. And then look at your telco bills. Most homes have an NBN plan. The difference between the most expensive NBN plan, which is usually Telstra, although there's a couple of smaller ones now that offer very high speeds that are more expensive than Telstra. But comparing Telstra, which half of Australia is with almost, to the cheapest providers on the market, just for a standard speed NBN plan, which is the most common NBN plan, the difference now, I had a look at this just yesterday, the difference is about $40 a month. So that's $480 a year if you're prepared to switch from the most expensive to the cheapest, or one of the most expensive to one of the cheapest. So there's another $500. And then, most families have multiple mobile plans. I know we do. We've got 4 mobile plans in our house now. My kids are getting older. And, so across all of those, the difference between, again, just signing up to the most expensive or having a look around and playing the price game would be hundreds of dollars. So there's already over $2,000 pushing towards $3,000 in savings just from being prepared to shop around on those 6 bills in 1 year.
If you invest it well every year on top, that's a lot.
Exactly. And we haven't even talked about groceries yet, which is the second biggest bill in most households, right? Probably $15,000 to $20,000 average bill for a home, groceries. That's a harder one because the beauty of energy, of utilities and insurances is once a year you can usually have a look at that, see what's out there, maybe do a bit of negotiating or just switch.
Low effort, high impact.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. Yeah. Whereas groceries, it's week in, week out. So it's more about strategies and habits that you get into that you then repeat over and over again. I sometimes say that, groceries is a war of attrition, whereas the other household bills, it's a once a year battle. If you come out on top, you're on top for the rest of the year.
And so, you mentioned one big switch. So, are there certain things that you can get help with from there, or from other providers in this field? Can you maybe share a little more about that?
Yeah, look, I think a big part of being confident about household bills is actually just knowing where to look for help, because there is now so much help out there, and Upworth is a great example of this. The advances in technology that we've seen over the past decade or so have made it so much easier for consumers. I talk about David and Goliath as being another one of my sort of, saving strategies in the book. And what I mean by that is that when you're just dealing with a massive power company or a massive insurance company or a bank, you're David, they're Goliath. They're rich, they're sophisticated, they've got teams of actuaries looking at all the data, working out how you're likely to respond to certain, situations or whatever. You're on your own most of the time. So it can be really, really hard. It's not a very level playing field. But in that original story of David and Goliath, David takes him down with a rock and a sling, and that's a form of technology, even though we would consider this technology. The technology of its day was a rock and a sling. Technology is very powerful if we can harness it as consumers to level that playing field. And we've never seen so many tools at our disposal as consumers as we do now, particularly over the last 10 years. And so whether it's comparison websites or whether it's organisations like One Big Switch that were made possible by digital aggregation of consumers, or it's apps, or it's this new open data regime which we're seeing in Australia, the consumer data right, where your data can be instantaneously shared with businesses or organisations that you ask to have access to it. These are all really powerful tools that work in our favour against Goliath to level that playing field. And that's what we're seeing now. It's as long as you know, the hard thing is sometimes knowing where the first port of call is. So let's say you get a big insurance premium increase, or you get a big increase in your mobile plan, and you want to know what to do about it. I could tell you the first place to go to minimise the amount of time and energy you spend on it, get a really quick, really good
better
result.
return for your time investment, basically.
Yeah, but if you don't know that, you might go to Google, you might see that there's all these different options, you don't know which one's the best, and so you basically, it all looks too hard, and often people go, it's too hard, I'm not going to do anything. You do nothing, you just cop the price rise, And year after year, you cop the price rise, and before you know it, you're paying way more than you have to. So, yeah, I think it's often just knowing the tools, the powerful tools in the short list, and where to find them, where to go. And that's partly what my books are about, partly what, One Big Switch and my other content is about, is just telling people, you've got this problem, go here first. Yeah.
I mean, super interesting, and indeed that's the same, basic analysis that we have done as well in Upworth on how we can help people have more visibility and understanding of what's their situation, what's the market situation as well, and make the best decision for themselves. And it's interesting because you mentioned comparison website. One of our analysis was really, we are kind of disappointed by what we see in this field, because we realize that most comparison websites are actually subvention, and they actually don't show you the full picture. They show you the ones that from the sponsors that have paid to be at the top of the page. And then it's kind of defeating the purpose of the comparison in the first place, right? So that's...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the real challenges as well. As a punter, as a consumer, how do you know if that comparison website is showing you the whole market? Or, we have government comparison websites in some areas, which do, as a matter of principle, show every single available plan. In energy, we have that, for example. But I still think probably the best energy comparison website is a private one, which does show the whole market. There's one called Whatever, WATTEVER. It's really good for solar customers, which the government website is not. It allows you to search for fixed rate plans and do various things that the government website doesn't do. So I think that's probably the best at the moment. So sometimes, the private ones are best, sometimes the government ones are best, but it's hard to know with the private comparison sites, because some of them actually are vertically integrated with, there are some insurance comparison ones that are owned by insurance companies, and they just show mostly their own policies. So, that can be really hard. Yeah.
Independence is one of the things that we are trying to build at Upworth, and to align our interests with our customers. And as you mentioned, also the open data, open consumer data rights and open banking is really something that we are working with. I don't know, so if you had the time to have a quick look at what we are doing. So where does it fit in your vision? What do you think of the product, the vision?
Yeah, look, I think like I said, I think it's one of a number of examples that I see now of technology being harnessed to empower consumers in a way that we've never been able to do before. And as a journalist, I've been covering this story of the open data regime and consumer data right for years, and I've been quite frustrated because for years governments talked about it, and I've written columns about it, I've interviewed people who are working right at the forefront of it, but I've struggled to see concrete examples of how it is helping people, and we're finally starting to see that, and I think that's really exciting. So I think it's taken a lot longer than we thought it would, but these things often do. It's like building something. It always takes 1.5 times as long, costs
then
1.5
you actually
times
do
as
it,
much.
then you realize the shortcomings, and you do a second round, and then finally some people start to implement it, and then you follow up, and then most people that are supposed to implement it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a few waves there, which lead me to one of the subjects I saw in your book, that you are the worst surfer in the world. Why that?
I call myself the world's longest serving beginner surfer because I started learning as an adult, and I must have started learning when I was about 30, I think, or thereabouts. It's very hard to learn to surf as an adult, and I don't think I've really got much better since the age of 30. So I feel like I'm stuck in that, you've got beginner, intermediate, advanced. I'm going to be beginner for the rest of my life, but I've stuck with it because I love it. I love the ocean. Even if I don't catch any waves, I love bobbing around out there in the ocean. And we do it as a family.
To find the sharks, right?
I haven't seen one yet, but I've seen a couple of enormous, big black stingrays as big as this table swim right under me. That gave me a bit of a fright. But
you know how to negotiate for your life, right? Anyway.
Exactly right. Yeah, the De Niro. I don't think it would work with a shark somehow, but yeah, hopefully I never have to find out.
Well, we are all like small fishes surrounded by big sharks, but now that we have the negotiation skills, the mindset of De Niro, I think a lot of good things can happen. So I think really thanks a lot again for joining us today. we all have to improve in this field, I think, myself included, and there are massive saving opportunities then can be used to, significant investment and having people achieve financial independence faster and better, and obviously, more importantly, avoid financial distress. So really inspiring. So I would definitely invite our audience to look at your book, Easy Money: The 7 Steps to Bust the Bills. As well as check out like the website, right, onebigswitch.com.au, and obviously once you have managed to, and you can also follow your savings and your expenses as well soon on upworth.com.au in our product. So we are working in the same direction, and hopefully we turn this working into running together forward. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.